Hi, my name's Amy Lewis. I am with the Wild Foundation, and I'm also here with Harvey Locke, and we will be discussing Motion 101 and the movement to protect half of Earth's land and seas.
I first attended a World Conservation Congress in the mid-1990s when we all knew that the world had very, very big problems that had to be addressed urgently. And here I am going to another World Conservation Congress in 2021 where the conversation is going to be about the urgent problems we must face. It's time that we move past the rhetoric and into concrete, transformative, large-scale actions, commitments, and recognitions of some fundamental things like the science is that we should be protecting at least half the world, land and ocean and fresh water, in an interconnected way. And this idea of Motion 101 is a motion that just says, let's recognize that as a foundation for future action. Well, the most terrifying word in a moment of crisis is the word inertia. And inertia can mean things that are stopped, stay stopped, or things that are moving, keep moving. What we really need is acceleration towards something very, very different. We don't need evolutionary change, nudging changes, inflections. We've talked about that for 30 years. Now we're in the middle of it. We've got to act big, move quickly, and move in a transformative manner around protection of nature, how we produce the goods and services that we like, and how we consume them. But to say that this problem can be solved by everyone riding their bicycle and planting their organic garden and only buying recyclable products and used clothing is not going to solve a problem that's a systemic scale problem. We have to transform the world's systems as well as individual behaviors. And just transforming individual behaviors will not get us there. So that's why we have to act together at a big scale and also at a small scale. Top down, bottom up. And we have to, all of us, get on the oars and start rowing because we are in a deep time of peril and we have to move now. Well, in simple terms, systemic change lies at the level of political systems. We've had large systemic changes in the past. There was once a time when people said we couldn't have an efficient economy without child labor. There was once a time when people said our economy couldn't afford the end of slavery. There was once a time when we didn't have any safe drinking water for people, and even children were drinking beer to avoid the pollution from the water supplies available. It's not that we don't know how to make changes in the public interest. It's that we've chosen not to make changes in the public interest because a critical mass of the powerful and others who are persuaded by what the powerful think is good have decided the direction we're on is making us all get more flat screen TVs and more fancy telephones, and we can zoom around the world and do all those things. But we are actually killing the life support system on which we all depend, on which all that economic activity is based, on which every social issue is based, is a proper relationship with nature. And it's time we recognize that the environment, nature is a context for all life. Inside that, and wholly dependent on it, is human society. And inside that is the economy, which is there only to serve people. It has no other life of its own. There's no such thing as a divine economy or the invisible hand that runs amok around the world that everyone else has to worship. All these ideas have gotten really confused in our society. It's time we understood what traditional people have never forgotten, and by that I mean people like indigenous people, but also older traditions. Our oldest cultural traditions recognize that the earth is the context for all life, and humans are a subset of that. Only recently, in the last 100 or 200 years, has Western society come up with this ridiculous idea that we're somehow above the earth, that we manage the earth, that we know better, that we can control everything. And what we've proven is that we're more like a bull in the china shop than we are like a creative force. We can rampage around the china shop, break dishes, do all kinds of harm, but we don't know how to make china. We have to stop it now by changing our visions of what we want to be in the world. And one of the easiest things to do is to recognize that we need to protect at least half the world across all the conditions that exist in some way or another that works practically. And it'll be different in cities and farms than it'll be in large wild areas, but we need to go to that kind of scale with clarity, determination, and with a smile on our faces to say, this is the future we want, this is the future we need, and no other future is viable. It's really simple. And that's our moment. I hope this Congress helps to be a moment of inflection that turns that big super tanker of a boat in a different direction than where it's been going. And if we don't, if we just say nice things again, then it won't be any different than any of the others I've been to for many years that keep saying we need transformative change, and then we don't make it. This time, we need to make it. In 2009, when we closed the World Wilderness Congress in Mexico, I gave the closing plenary and said, now it's time we recognize the science plus indigenous knowledge systems say we should protect half the world, so let's say it out loud and say that's what we ought to do. Over the course of the last 12 years, that's evolved into being kind of a central idea in conservation, a central question. Paper after scientific paper has confirmed that level of protection is needed for a variety of things like biodiversity, fixing carbon to keep it out of the air, to provide ecosystem services like fresh water. It's super clear that we need to be at that scale or more, not less, more. And at the same time, we've seen the needle move where there's a substantial conversation now about protecting 30% of the world by 2030, which is definitely progress in the right direction. I feel a higher degree of urgency than that, but at least I admire and respect that that needle is moving in that direction, and we've got to figure out how we can do the art of the politically feasible plus recognize what we ought to do immediately at the same time, which is a delicate dance, but I think we can make that dance work. When I grew up, the future was one of hope. You expected things were going to get better, and you expected to participate in that bettering. Now, we have young people all over the world really, really afraid of the future. We have their parents afraid of the world they're leaving to their children. That's not good enough. We have to change things so that we get that back on the trajectory of hope. And the number one question in the hope column is our relationship with the natural world, nature, the climate, all the other living things. Until we shift that to a direction that is legitimately hopeful, then it's just going to get darker and darker and sadder and worse and worse. Now, why would we accept that? Let's turn this around. Let's go to the place where hope lies. Let's go to the place where optimism lies. Let's shift stuff and let's look at our grandchildren in the eye and say, I'm proud that we made the intervention, albeit at the last minute, that made things better than they are now, rather than continuing to allow them to get worse, because that's the condition we're in. We're not in this 10 years to make change period, or it's almost too late. We're not almost too late. We're in the soup now. It's already too late to fix everything. It's not too late to make things better than they would be if we didn't act. And that's what we need to focus on, is making things the best we can, as fast as we can. And I really hope this World Conservation Congress in Marseille is a moment in time when we'll look back on and say, we saw the challenge, we grasped it, and at least this critical mass of people agreed that we need to make that substantial transformational change towards an equitable, nature-positive, and carbon-neutral world, and recognize the idea that we need to protect at least half the world while we're at it. Well, for me, this has been a long journey towards understanding how much of the world we need to protect and then saying it out loud. And I'm really excited that we're now talking about what the science and what the traditional indigenous knowledge says we need to do, which is protect at least half the world. Whether or not people have the, let's say, the political confidence, courage to embrace it, we'll find out this week. But for me, at least, we're speaking about the right question in the right place with the right group of people. And for me, there is a right answer, and that is that we recognize that's a science. How we implement it, that's a second question that we also will have to wrestle with immediately. But from my point of view, I take some comfort that at least now we're prepared to confront the big question as a community and discuss it openly, instead of just a kind of a priori political filter that people put on it. Say, well, people won't find that reasonable, so we can't talk about it. The only reasonable thing to talk about right now is what the Earth needs. The only reasonable thing to talk about is how do we restrain ourselves so that our future is one of stability and optimism and hope, instead of one dark nightmare, which is starting to unfold. And the terror that I feel is that people think, oh, we've got the luxury of a lot more time. We don't. We just don't. We were warned in 1992, when the world scientists warning to humanity that we were off course and we were going to get in trouble, 29 years later, they were proved right. Okay, what are we going to do about that? We're going to make change. We're going to make it big, we're going to make it fast, and we're going to make it with a big smile, and we're going to include everybody we can so that we are also fair about this kind of change. Is it hard work? Yes. Is it daunting work? Yes. Is there any other proper challenge? No. Therefore, I feel good that we're talking about something that could matter, that I could look my grandchildren in the eye and say, we acted. We acted together, and I did my best to be part of causing that action. And if I weren't doing that, I would feel terrible about myself. Whether or not we succeed is not up to exclusively me.